friends. Welcome to the Skinny on Wall Street with us, the Wall Street Skinny. I'm Kristen.
I'm Jen.
And today we're going to do something a little bit different. So usually our sort of midweek episodes are devoted to us chatting about stuff going on in the markets or a big deal. What we're going to be covering today is Jen and I had, not the privilege, I don't know. We decided like we needed to finally watch The Industry.
This was all you started watching it, and I was like, oh, I need to get to that. We haven't done season 4 of Succession. And you were like, I already started.
Well, we've done a number of podcast episodes devoted to explaining the finance of Succession, and we've constantly been getting feedback from all of you that like, please watch The Industry. I need to hear your take on The Industry. And we didn't know a lot about it. I knew that it had come out a couple of years ago. I thought it got canceled. I hadn't heard a lot of great things about it. And then recently, I was listening to some people talk about how they were like, this is my new Game of Thrones. I'm so excited every time the show comes out. Like Kit Harington is going to be in season 3. And I was like, you know what? We need to watch this. Let's start it. So I watched the first episode and I was like, Jen, you are going to die. Like it is all fixed income, sales and trading. And so what we're going to be doing now is basically this is going to be basically like season 1, episode 1, but
That's
is
it.
so
just
much.
episode 1.
Just episode 1.
Seen. So no spoilers, guys. Do not tell me what's going to happen.
No, we're not going to get into any spoilers, but what we want to do is basically cover the things that the show gets right, which by the way, there is a lot. It is a very dark show. I do want to put that out there. It's basically Suits meets Euphoria. You know, on the levity spectrum, it is not a light show. In the first episode, again, we deal with a lot
There's some very dark humor, though, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
Akin to Succession.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, and again, like HBO, they know how to do shows. They know how to do it well. They are well-researched. And so we're going to get into it. And so Jen, I'm going to give you the honors. There's a lot more sales and trading. I have heard that this first episode is the only one that has the banking stuff. So I will come in and chime in on some of the banking stuff. But again, what this is actually like so cool is they get so much right. And they actually do really capture what like the energy is like on the trading floor. Like they do. Anyway, so I'm going to shut up and Jen, I'm going to kick it on over to you.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know, The Industry effectively chronicles the lives of a new crop of analysts joining a made up investment bank. They call it Pierpoint. And by the way, minute 1, second 1, I was already so excited because like I used to cover a real firm called Pierpont. So I immediately was like, okay, let's fucking go. Okay. And full disclosure, I sat down to watch this show with a current fixed income MD. So I had like an additional sounding board for all of my reactions. I'm not the kind of person who like laughs out loud at a show or like jumps out of my chair screaming unless I'm with someone. So because I was like, oh my God, we're freaking out. Okay. But not about the name, about other stuff.
Yeah.
So the show starts out by giving a glimpse into all of their interviews, which was a montage that I thought was done really well. And it starts with the sales MD, Eric, interviewing the main character, Harper. And the first thing he says is, I've never seen anyone put their IQ on a resume before. And I love that line because it speaks to so many things about the vetting process and the interviews. One of them being this, and we give this tip very often when it comes to resume building. If there's something you are proud of, that can be used as demonstrable proof that you're smart and you can learn quickly, use that to your advantage, especially for a character like Harper, because we come to find very quickly that she's coming from a non-target school.
Yep.
And in our personal experience, I had a perfect score on my SATs and my SAT 2s. And you better believe I included that on my resume when I was applying to be an intern because I wanted to offset the fact that I was an English major with like a less than perfect GPA, which most of you know.
Yeah.
And the non-target school is something that they mentioned kind of casually at the beginning, but is very clearly going to become the groundwork for a bigger plot point down the road. Christian, you mentioned this as being akin to like the Mike, did he not go to Harvard?
Did he not go to Harvard? Yeah.
Suits.
Yeah. Except for with this one character, you do get the sense that like, did she graduate? They need her transcript, which again, we're gonna get to in a little bit. And she like is sort of dragging her heels. So it's clear that she like somehow something happened where she somehow did not graduate even college. But yeah,
and it's very clearly like an HBO over traumatized plot point or whatever about the haves and have nots that we'll get into. But like, we'll save that for later because clearly they're going to explore that down the road in this season because they don't fully wrap it up by the end of the first episode.
Yeah.
They also do make the point that she's an American applying to work in London, and there's going to be visa issues that they have to navigate to ensure her ability to work there long term, which is a great point, because we get asked all the time from our audience that is based outside the US about what hoops you have to jump through to come work in the US. There are other hoops that you have to jump through if you are an American who wants to work in another office at a firm. And it's very atypical as an American to be applying to a satellite office or another of another firm that's already based in the US. So already this is like kind of a cool perspective. You've got like an American werewolf in London, right? Like you've got an American who's applying to be in a fixed income sales and trading role at a London-based firm. At least I think it's a London-based firm. I don't think it's the London office of an American firm, but I can't tell that from the first episode.
Yeah,
I'm assuming it's a London-based firm.
I'm one episode shy of finishing the first season. I don't believe they have like a US presence. Like I've not seen that. It's possible, but they have not mentioned it at all, if there is. So
that doesn't mean that they don't trade US products, and we're going to get into that. But okay, so she says something in the montage of the interviews that really resonated right off the bat. Now she's coming from a non-target school. She's a minority. And she says, I chose this because I think this is the closest thing to a meritocracy.
Yeah.
And that landed so true with me, because we've seen this countless times. When we talk to traders on our podcast, Kristen, remember when we brought Ashish Goyal on, right?
Yeah.
He's the world's first blind trader. And I remember he said the exact same thing about why he became a trader. And I think you poll most traders and they'll say the same thing, that when you have a number next to your name that's based purely on your abilities, the rest of the bullshit, right? Did you go to a target school? Did you come from a wealthy family? Are you able-bodied? Whatever. It doesn't fucking matter. Okay.
Yep.
Now moving on, they have other great things in the interview montage that are totally true. There's the "let me tell you a joke," okay, which is the classic one. I was shocked they actually like didn't show a brain teaser. But okay, Kristen, this was wild. There is quite literally a near replica of one of my more disastrous Goldman Sachs interviews. Like I've had many disastrous Goldman Sachs interviews, but it was eerie. Okay, so Gus during his interview says, I played second fiddle to two figures in my mother's life, Jesus Christ and Margaret Thatcher. And when the interviewer asked him where he stands on both of them, he says, one's the reason we're all here, and the other was a carpenter, which is absolutely hilarious. Okay, but get this. I don't remember the exact content of the interview question, but I do remember having to craft an argument in a Goldman Sachs interview about who was a better salesperson, my mom, Jesus Christ, or Bill Clinton at the time. I'm not even kidding. Okay, this was a true story. So 30 seconds into the show, I'm like, these guys did their research. Also, like, did they bug my interview in 2005? Like, what's happening? So after they do the interview montage, they show you the trading floor and what it's like showing up on a trading floor for the first time. Now, the trading floor that they've constructed as their set is relatively small compared to most of the ones that I've ever worked on or ever walked onto. Yeah. And like small details, two things that stood out to me though. First of all, the carpet is red. That stood out huge to me. You would never have red carpet on a trading floor. Red is a really ominous color in trading. Yeah, red represents loss, right? You don't want
the green and the
traders
red.
Are notoriously superstitious. So you would not, I would be shocked if you had a red carpet. I've never seen a red carpet.
Actually, true story. I have a colleague who showed up to teach a class in a red shirt and they were like, we don't wear red here.
Yeah, no, you don't wear red, right? It's funny. It's something that we talk about a lot, like, because you love the color red. I'm like,
I love red. I love red.
I know. Yeah. But the second thing is that's pretty unusual. They have the investment bankers, the IBD, positioned on an upper floor behind a glass wall where they can see the trading desk. I've never seen a layout like that, so that's also a little unusual. But
I mean, what they did get right, though, is they got right that the bankers are higher up. And like, so most of the time, to your point, you would have in like a bank. So in Morgan Stanley, where we worked at Lehman, you would have floors 2 to 4 are the trading floors. And then it would be like floors 35 to 44 are the banking floors.
So that's the construction of the newer builds that were built in Times Square, specifically at a certain era, where the bottoms of the building were wider. For example, there are other buildings. I'm here in Charlotte. So banks that have a trading floor, they have almost like a podium jutting out the back, and then the taller towers. But this is not the case for all investment banks, especially investment banks in older buildings that predate the early aughts, which is when that huge move to Times Square happened with the Morgan Stanley building, the Lehman, et cetera, et cetera. It's more, so this is something that is tied to a specific time. And I also do think it's tied to a specific place. So part of the reason that this may be structured this way is if it is a smaller firm where everyone's together, right? That could be the reason why they're showing. It may just be like the architectural configuration of the building. It is just unusual though, but to your point, versus the Lehman and Morgan Stanley specific, or Lehman and then ultimately Barclays when they took over that building. But Barclays, their sales and trading offices were actually in the MetLife building on a high floor.
Oh, interesting.
When I started working at Barclays after the merger, but before they took over the 7th Avenue Lehman building. So it's not universal that you have the big podium structure. It is more common though. UBS used to have a football field, right? Out in Stanford.
One other thing I did want to point out, which I thought was interesting too, there's this interaction between Hari, who is, and again, obviously spoilers, you're warned. I mean, look, if you're listening to this episode, you know you're going to get a spoiler, but Hari is a investment banker who ultimately dies at the end of episode 1. But he and Harper are friends. They're living in corporate housing together, which they say is like, you know, for the out-of-towners, temporary housing, whatever. And so they have this interaction, which again is like actually, I think, a kind of typical interaction between banking, because he's in IBD and then she's obviously in sales and trading. And so Hari says, I'm up in the ivory tower upstairs and you're down here on the floor with the peasants. And I do think there is a real sentiment that sometimes people in banking do look down a little bit on sales and trading. Now, what's funny is that I think that, you know, you in sales and trading used to look down on banking, but like, it's funny that like in both cases, like they both look down on the other as the other job is like a lesser job. But it's, anyway, it was an interesting interaction.
Well, the point that Harper makes to Hari at the beginning of that conversation is she says, if you work it out, the number of hours you work in IBD, you are earning less than minimum wage. So, and we'll get into a little bit more of kind of the hierarchy of how people look down on each other within all of the different roles within fixed income sales and trading. But so this was pre-COVID that this aired. But one thing that I think is a really interesting shift that's happened in real time is if you talk to people who are on trading floors now, the new hires that have come in since 2022, their reaction when they step on a trading floor for the first time is palpably different from that of people who would start before COVID. Because these are people who are so used to Zoom, who are used to interacting on their smartphones, and who are not used to the overwhelming visual and auditory stimulus of a place like this. And I think they did a really good job of capturing that in part. But to be clear, this is a much reduced version of what that's actually like in real life. This is a small trading floor, relatively speaking. And so if you've never been on a trading floor, imagine what you see in the industry, only significantly bigger. And so they show Harper getting in while the floor is still relatively empty and then showing it filling up and the noise and hustle and bustle picking up. This is very accurate, right? This is what you would do at the beginning of your first year. You want to be the first one on the desk to show how eager and hardworking you are. And so they cut to the middle of the morning, and I seriously had chills watching this, okay? So for those of you who've ever seen a salesperson's desk, the way they did Harper's desk, that is exactly what it looks like. Although again, I'm sitting there with my trader husband, and he's like, only 3 screens? What, are we homeless? And like, listen, traders usually have 6 or more screens. 3 is fine for salespeople. Some salespeople have 4, 5, or 6, but 3 is very common. And so if you looked at her setup, she's got the 3 screens up here. Then she's got this big black box sitting at a 45-degree angle below her screens. That's the phone bank. It has something like 100 buttons on it, and those are going to be direct lines to traders or clients. She's got a long microphone coming out of it, and that's how you'd use the hoot, which is like a speaker that amplifies your voice instantly into the box of either like one other person if you're trying to communicate all the way across the floor but don't want to stand up for whatever reason, or a whole group of people, and that's already pre-programmed in. And she's got a Bloomberg keyboard. You can tell by the certain colors on it. She's got her Bloomberg open to her right. I personally liked mine open to the left, to each their own, okay. And I actually freeze framed this to see what she actually had on her screen. So she's got a bunch of charts and graphs up, but there is one thing glaringly missing. And she is missing the giant stack of instant Bloomberg chats.
I was going to say,
you would have open permanently. So for millennials, think of IB chats as like AOL Instant Messenger, or for younger people, think about like your DMs and Instagram or whatever. That's how you're constantly communicating with clients in groups and individually throughout the day. So like each chat has like, it's like a group chat on your phone, but in a visible format, and it's got like a stupid name for each one, and like sometimes you change the name depending on your mood.
Yeah, but I want to be clear because you are not allowed to message people any other way because they want to be able to monitor everything you say. And so like if you go to a bank, Facebook is blocked, Instagram is blocked. Every single way that you could message someone aside from email because they monitor your email and Bloomberg are blocked. And I remember actually when I was at Morgan Stanley thinking it was cool because I could talk to you on my Bloomberg. Like I couldn't go on Facebook or whatever, but I could talk to you on Bloomberg. And so that's the other thing is that like the only way that you're allowed to communicate is via typically Bloomberg or email.
Such a great point. And forget about using your personal phone to text, by the way, under the table. Like, no. Absolutely not. They show her managing director on the phone. And he's got this big black phone with a toggle switch up by the earpiece. That is so incredibly accurate. Okay. These are the phones that have been used on trading floors since the dawn of time. That toggle switch is a mute function. Now, some people do wear headsets, but occasionally you will physically need to be on two phones at once where the party in each ear is not supposed to hear the other one and you're toggling the mute buttons back and forth. It's actually a physical skill that you need to develop. And I always thought headsets were too clunky for that.
So you can mute it like in certain parts, like as you're, okay, that makes sense. 'Cause there's one trade later where she's like, the guy's like, why would she buy this thing? And she's like, well, I convinced her because I told her this thing. And I'm like, can't she hear? So this actually makes complete sense.
Yeah. We'll get to the trade execution because I have so much to say about that. This is going to be like a 2-hour episode. We need to cancel our 1 p.m. meeting. Okay. So the phones, they physically plug in under the desk. And when you're an intern, sometimes you're literally given a phone with this dangling cord and told to go rotate around and plug into people's calls on mute so you can listen to how they speak. Because that is how you learn from salespeople. So it brings me to my next point, because as a junior salesperson, you will almost always be listening in on mute to every single call that the senior person on the desk or whoever is immediately above you is making. That's how you learn. You listen to hours and hours of phone conversations. A, with the goal of mastering how to talk about the markets. B, with the goal of supporting your manager. Because if someone does a voice trade, right, you need to hear both the inquiry and the execution. So you're making sure they're not doing a mistake. You're a second set of ears and eyes. You're knowing what the trade is because guess what? As a junior person, you're responsible for confirming it and booking it, right? And the last point is that you want to get to know the clients, even if it's somewhat indirectly and you're just hearing it through conversation. When we get to the point later where Harper gets invited to her first dinner, she's like, oh, I'll research this client and figure out her mandate. Well, guess what? If you've been listening on mute, you already know all that shit, right? So like, it's one of those things that they missed that you would always see. And to your point, Kristen, those lines are also all recorded for compliance purposes.
Without giving any spoilers, Jen has told a story in the past about how she had a client accuse her of going the wrong way on the trade and they had to roll the tapes. In a subsequent episode, they talk about having to roll the tapes. So
I'm so excited for that episode. I've heard so much about it. I was also dying laughing because they have these like funny little scenes. There's another junior salesperson who they kind of use for like comedic relief. And they show him asking his manager, like they get called into this big meeting, like, oh, here's the big, indoctrination meeting at the beginning, where you're going to get to understand how the program works. And he gets up and he does the right thing. He goes to his manager like, hey, can I get you anything? MD completely ignores him, does not look up from what he's doing. This happens all the time. And they also show like, oh my God, all the time. And it totally depends, right? Some are really nice and friendly. Some of the old school guys, and that is the character they're building for that particular guy, that he's an old school sales guy, would be like, who are you? Probably wouldn't even know the name of the guy working for him for the first 6 months. Like it is so accurate. And you also see all the analysts and associates ribbing each other about their clothing. Like, oh, you're wearing this brand. Oh, you're wearing this. Well,
it's funny because so like the guy who you were talking about, he also is poor and he comes from, again, a poor background and he's getting shit for his clothing. It actually like reminded me so much. I've told you about my brother who like we'd show up with his clothes needing to be ironed. He'd brag about his like TJ Maxx tie. And I'm like, Brian, I don't know if it's a New England thing. Like people, born in New England, like are very proud of how little they spent on whatever thing that they got.
It is a New England thing.
Yeah, we were talking about that.
But there is, to your point, Kristen, there is this dichotomy that they're setting up between the haves and the tryhards, right? The people who come from some lineage into the business that seems natural, and the people who want the job, need the job, are super hungry for the job, and didn't come from quote unquote the right background. So that's definitely something they're setting up and that we'll get into.
And it's interesting because I do think with Harper and then Hari, Harper has the natural abilities. Like you can see it because she puts her IQ on her resume. Whereas I feel like Hari, he has to really try. We hear him talk about how he came from a state school. He really has to prove himself and he really needs to try hard.
Yeah. So the analysts then get together for this big speech about the program. And I always think back to that season 1, episode 1 Grey's Anatomy episode where there's this spiel from Richard Weber where he's like, 1 in 3 of you won't be here a year from now. I got that same spiel at Lehman, but of course the joke there is that that was true for entirely different reasons.
Everybody was gone. The firm was done.
But they say that you're going to have to prove your worth over the next 6 months until RIF day, RIF standing for reduction in force, or maybe you'll be offered the opportunity to stay on full time. Usually analyst programs in both investment banking and sales and trading are 2 years long. You might do 4 6-month rotations through different groups during that time in sales and trading, depending on the bank. But it's very unusual that it would be an up or out after just 6 months. They invest so much in recruiting and training you.
Yeah,
it would just simply not make economic sense. Yeah. So then Harper reveals that the name of her group is CPS. Doing some Googling, I've determined that this stands for cross-product sales, which is just a typical made-up name within fixed income sales and trading. She's basically, even though they say rates and FX in other contexts in the episode, she's in rate sales, okay, which is where I spent my career. And over the course of a decade at 3 different banks, our group was renamed from interest rate sales to cross-market sales or macro sales or whatever, some nonsense rebranding thing to reflect the fact that rates really sits at the intersection of everything, not just treasuries and swaps and options, but agencies and mortgages and credit and FX, along with things that don't fall under any one desk, like correlation trades that would be structured across multiple desks at the firm. Rates ended up handling all of that. It's one of those seats where you really do get to be a jack of all trades. And so that's why they do this rebranding.
I was like, this is like the best thing that's happened to Jen, because now if somebody asks her what she used to do, she can be like, go watch The Industry. I was Harper.
Representation matters, okay? Like I've never seen on TV, they show, okay.
And it's the bond, and it's
investment bankers have American Psycho, okay? Stockbrokers have Wolf of Wall Street, and they have Wall Street, and
nobody's a stockbroker anymore. Yeah.
No. But I'm just saying, everybody else, fixed income sales and trading has never once been represented with this level in pop culture, to my knowledge, except for
definitely not.
In things like Liar's Poker, right? Which was written 40 years ago at this point. So like, there is nothing else that depicts this, and where they did so much research.
Yeah.
Okay, so they go back to the desk after they do this, like, everyone is your competition speech, blah, blah, blah. They show the analysts handing out coffee with, like, everyone's particular order, all right? They've got the salespeople who are, like, all telling their ridiculous stories on the phone. This is all accurate. Then they cut back to Harper and her MD. And this is the first place where I'm simultaneously, like, really, really proud of the showrunners for taking a risk and showing a very real trade inquiry, but also disappointed because they didn't get it quite right. Okay, so they show the managing director on the phone. Again, Harper's not listening in. She's looking at her very important graphs. And he instructs her to ask Rishi, the trader, for the level of, and I quote, 1 year euro swaps in 500K DV01. I cannot tell you what joy this brought me, because
Jen was like, I was getting the live stream
in pop culture.
Yeah, like Jen basically like giddy on the phone, just live streaming, like, this is so much fun. Just like, this is my favorite show. And then she's like, I'm screaming at the TV. This doesn't make any sense because you wouldn't do this. So yeah.
Well, yeah. So, okay. So for those of you may have seen on our social media, we've discussed this in previous podcasts. I'm not going to get into the full download here, but what the inquiry means is, where is the fixed rate on a 1-year interest rate swap starting 1 year in the future? It's a derivative contract where one party agrees to pay or receive a fixed rate cash flow, and the other party agrees to receive or pay a floating rate cash flow tied to some underlying rate. Again, we could do a whole episode on this, but we're going to keep it to just really high level stuff. When they say euro, it means denominated in euros, not US dollars, not sterling, not anything else. And it's priced off of whatever the underlying benchmark is for swaps in that country. It used to be Euribor before the LIBOR scandal, just like we used to have LIBOR in the US, and now it's SOFR. I think in the EU it's Ester. I've never priced an Ester swap because they didn't exist when I was on the floor. But the basic mechanics are still the same. And so when they say 500K in DV01, that is saying that if the trade is executed, they will back into whatever notional size on that derivatives contract mathematically means each party will make or lose $500,000 or euros, 500,000 euros for every single basis point. That's 1/100% that the 1 year rate moves up or down. This is a 5 billion euro trade in a rate that moves once every second or twice every second.
What did Kristen call this?
Yeah, my husband was joking that this is like a widowmaker trade. Like if you're not paying attention, you're going to be down $3 million before you bat an eyelash. This isn't just an outright rate trade. This is a forward rate trade. So it's got curve risk. Something like 1 year trades more along the lines of baubles, which are 5-year German bonds, than
bauble?
Schatz. Well, you've talked about bunds before. So if you know the whole German bond curve, there's Schatz, which are 2s, baubles, which are 5, and bunds.
Schatz is a very unfortunate name for a bond. I mean,
but yeah, so this is a chunky, good-sized trade with a lot of risk to it. And it's big enough size that it would still be appropriate probably to do this kind of trade voice rather than via a streaming electronic platform, which you now have to use by mandate, by law, for a lot of smaller trades. So anyways, the MD asks her to get this price. And he's given her a size, which means you're either going to get a bid, an offer, or a two-way market, which is a bid and an offer at the same time, both executable. So she stands up quietly and she's like, Rishi, trying to get his attention. So we're sitting there screaming at the screen, being like, oh my God, louder, faster. Like, what the fuck? Like, oh my God, this is going to blow up in your face. And the MD even on the show was like, today, please. So there should be an urgency about a trade inquiry like this. The trader is ignoring her. So what we thought was going to happen was she'd finally spit out the inquiry and get his attention. He'd be like, why the fuck didn't you say something? Oh my God. That would have been accurate. Instead, the trader basically tells her to sit down and shut up and goes, I just sent a run to your Bloomy. This makes no sense. First of all, by the time he hits send on a Bloomberg run, which he would never send in this size on a forward rate, the pricing would be stale, and a run is just a list of pricing. Mm-hmm. Again, because she's given him a size, that means he needs to give her a bid or offer or a two-way. Mm-hmm. And then, listen, had this been something like single name CDS in a smaller size, like 10 million instead of 5 billion, in something where prices don't move more than like once an hour or like once a day, let alone second to second, it would have made more sense to say something like that. And then the MD just hangs up the phone, by the way. Like, what? Someone comes in for a great size trade that's going to bring significant risk to the firm, meaning there's a chance for the firm to make a lot of money by charging bid offer, and then the trader's going to hedge this thing strategically, and they do nothing with it. Like, so I was absolutely shocked that they went so far as to do all this research about what a chunky trade might look like, and then totally fumbled the whole, like, what should have been the punchline of it. Without that, though, I will say, I'm so pleased that they took a risk in showing this, because I guarantee you 99.9% of the people out there watching this had no idea what that meant. And if anything, we're just like, okay, it's a trade, right?
Yeah, right. Well, it's better than what you get out of other shows out there like Suits, where it's all just complete bullshit.
Absolutely. They used the lingo correctly. They made the point that the trader is looking down on and annoyed by the very newly minted analyst coming to him with a question, because that is the typical response. At most banks, you're not even allowed to formally make a trade inquiry or try to execute a trade until you have been on the desk for a long time. And at Lehman, it used to be this big ceremony. When you do your first trade, they'd cut your tie, right? Like, it would be this whole thing. It's a big deal. It's showing that you've like gained the competence to be trusted with real risk. Even as a salesperson, there's risk in you executing that trade. There's one more trade that we'll talk about. But so the MD, Eric, is a good MD. He is talking to her, and he casually talks about the fact that they got good feedback from one of their clients about a note she sent them about tail risk in the US. So basically that means that she sent over some analysis or trade ideas about an outcome that the market is actually assigning a very low chance of happening to. That's what we call tail risk. Yeah. And she's like, oh, well, I didn't copy you on the thank you because I didn't want to clog your inbox. And he goes, hey, talk your own book, meaning share your thoughts and share your successes, right? You've got to let me know all the good stuff you're doing so that I can help advocate for you and give me talking points about how you're adding value. And so he's giving her like really good career advice. Like he's a good manager.
Yeah. I mean, again, you'll see kind of what happens. But what I do like about this show is like, in general, it seems like all the characters are relatively complex. Like it's not like there's any, I don't know. It's just so often it can be so easy to make it so like this one person is the good guy, this one person's the villain. And the reality is like everyone, not that they're villain or a good guy, but it's like everyone is very complex. And I appreciate that because that's actually what real life is like, you know?
And so now we get to spend some time with Hari. So we do have that scene that you referenced where she basically talks about how many hours he's working. And we've covered this before on here, but really sales and trading is more like 6 to 6 with then client entertainment for 4 or 5 hours after the fact versus investment banking being easily 9 to midnight, if not, as we'll see with Hari, a little bit more. So you want to talk about Hari's little intro here?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, the show gets a lot right when it comes to banking. Obviously, here you have Gus and Hari. So they both are analysts, new hire analysts who are working together. We don't know exactly what the group is. It seems like it's some kind of TMT. They're working on a pitch for, what is it, like Hungry Fix, which seems like it's
basically like an Uber Eats or a DoorDash.
Yeah. So they're working on a pitch for the client. The CEO is going to be coming in and they need to pitch some options or some sort of like strategic alternatives for a potential acquisition. You know, there's a few things, again, this is more like the lifestyle things that they're getting accurate. So Hari goes and he comes up with like a whole bunch of waters. And Gus says to him, dude, why so many waters? Are you thirsty? And he's like, well, I have a 30 quid meal allowance. Like I need to, you'd be dumb not to use it, which by the way, is absolutely the mentality of new hire analysts who, you know, we've talked about how you feel like you're so rich because you see these headline numbers like $125,000. By the way, once you factor in taxes and the cost of living and like basically feeding yourself, you're not left with very much when all is said and done, just because these, you know, whether it's London or New York City, if you're living in those areas, it's just, it is so insanely expensive that again, you're going to be using up a lot of those money. So the banking analysts tend to try to like maximize every single dollar and every single night get as much as they can. Like if you're not hungry, you buy waters. Like this is so spot on. And so they're both working. And again, you can kind of see the dynamic just in the difference between their attitudes. Gus comes from this very privileged background. He clearly went to a target school, whereas Hari did not. And so Gus gets up to leave around 10:15. And Hari's like, where are you going? Like nobody's going to tell you this, but FaceTime matters. And Gus is kind of just like, me staying longer is going to impact the quality of my work. This isn't worth it. And so Gus gets up and leaves. And Hari, I mean, you can see he's really trying to like prove himself. Like, it's not like it's coming from the top down for people telling him he has to do this and pull on an all-nighter. And again, I guess the meeting isn't for a couple of days. And as Gus is leaving, he's like, oh, you're not going to finish the model? Send it to me. I have capacity. And Gus is like, what are you talking about? It's 10:15. You need to go home too. You don't have capacity. But they come in the next day. And as we said, they're getting ready for this pitch. And it's something that they say that is so spot on. So the associate says to Gus, again, who is running the model, she says, why did you change the WAC? And he says, well, the DCF came out too low. And this is something that is so perfectly encapsulates kind of like the difference between kind of the academic in the world and like what happens in practice. In academia, the amount of time and effort you spend to get the discount rate, the WAC, the weighted average cost of capital, is like you're going in, you're finding like, what is the cost of equity? What are all these different things to like come up with this one discount rate? And in reality, like, sure, you're going to do that analysis, but then I don't know, if your valuation's looking too low and like research has higher discount rates, you'd be like, 8% seems low. Let's bump it up to 9. Let's lower it to 7, because he's ultimately trying to get the value of the DCF up. And she says, okay, well, how does that compare to the transaction comps? Basically prior deals. How does your discounted cash flow analysis, how does that output compare to the valuation from these precedent transactions? And he says these pre-profit unicorns trade at crazy multiples, 8-9 times, which by the way, clearly this is a sales multiple, because that's the crazy multiple wouldn't be 8 to 9 times EBITDA. By the way, they're not profitable yet. So like clearly they're talking about sales. Less liquidity discount would be just over the DCF, which by the way, that is exactly what you want to have on your football fields. Like we've talked about this. So again, they're getting all this stuff so right, from the sort of academia of the discount rate being like, yeah, we'll like lower it a little bit to get the valuation up. Like everything was spot on. And then the VP, or actually, sorry, the associate, she sees Hari doing the model. She's like, why are you doing the model? I told you to be doing the pitch. By the way, nobody likes to do the pitch book. The model is seen as the better job. People love running the models. People hate doing the PowerPoint presentations. And so Hari is there and he's trying to like show that he's adding value. And he's like, I was looking at some of these other comps. I think there's this really great small company that has like good, he says sat nav IP. I assume that's like satellite navigation IP. I don't know. They're quite small. And she says, don't fish, just stick to the formatting. And for fuck's sake, stick to Helvetica 12 or the MD will freak. So this is all very true to what would be expected of a first-year analyst who's a few weeks in on the desk. They're kind of like, do your job, stick to the formatting. Like the MD is going to take the higher level, bigger picture stuff. And ultimately, I mean, the ultimate tragedy, and again, I think what's really kind of, I don't want to say dark, but I mean, we obviously have talked about, and it's been a huge thing. There's been a number of deaths that have occurred as a result of very likely overworking in investment banking at banks. And that has been, again, a huge conversation over the past year. And so the fact that this came out in 2020 was very prescient. I don't know. I mean, it was very interesting, but Hari, who is trying to prove himself, he's drinking tons of Red Bull, he's taking caffeine pills, like he's trying to stay up the whole time. You're like, go home, go to bed. And he like keeps getting back in the freaking cab and Uber and going back to the office. You're like, go home. And he has this conversation with Harper about how like Gus, looks down on him and everyone looks down on him because he's coming from a state school. He really has to prove himself. And you can see he's trying so hard. And then ultimately it ends in this terrible tragedy that ultimately has happened in real life. Because at one point I was like, what's sad is that I want to say this is not realistic. This was not my experience. I did not have people that were like, I'm going to pull all-nighters and do all that. I happen to be in a good group, but there are groups out there that have much more toxic cultures. So it was just the whole banking conversation. They did a good job on it.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. There's a big contrast between the experience of Hari and the experience of Harper. Mm-hmm. They are both coming from the non-target schools, and they both feel like everyone is talking down to them. Harper's literally later in the episode in the bathroom and overhears two females talking about her. And one said, oh, well, it's impossible to beat Harper's narrative. She's Black and she's from a non-target school and blah, blah, blah. She's impossible to beat, implying that Harper is a DEI hire and totally negating Harper's intellectual strength.
Right. Yeah.
Harper hears that and it lights a fire under her. She's like, fuck you guys. I'm going to go kill it at this job. How dare you say that about me? Yeah. Hari takes what he perceives as slights from Gus, and he is fighting a war against Gus rather than
Gus
trying to
fighting
be
it
the
against
best
him.
version of himself. So you see when Hari is making the PowerPoint slides for this presentation, he's sitting there and he's like putting his name on the left side of Gus's, and on the left, being on the left in a deal is the more prestigious place. Even if the two analysts at the bottom of the PowerPoint slide. He sits there with a straight edge on a piece of paper, making sure that their names are exactly level. So there's no chance that Gus's name could even... Right, but it's just with their names. It's not with all the organization of the slides in the PowerPoint. And by the way, nowadays they have like grid lines that can help with that. Like, just snap to
a line top, a line middle.
Yeah,
I do that a lot.
But so you see the two responses to the same type of stimuli, and you see how it's tragic for Hari, and Harper rises to the occasion.
Well, I was going to say, and the other thing that's very interesting too is that there was that comment about Harper being Black, but Gus is also Black. Gus, I mean, because he came from this background where he is coming from a target school, like he's dating this guy and the guy's like, oh, because he had written down, like prime minister by 35. And you can tell that for him, he's like, I am so good at what I do. I didn't, I went to a top school. So like for him being a minority, I don't want to say it's not on his radar, but it's like, it's a very interesting dynamic. It just speaks to like the complexity and like the sort of deeper that the showrunners are getting, that it's not just Harper is coming from a non-target school and is Black. It's then you have Gus who's coming from a target school and is Black and is also perceived as looking down on Hari. I appreciate that nothing is black and white. There's no one narrative. It's kind of like it's a more complex and more realistic telling of the intricacies and like the way people look up or look down. How you and I were talking about how sales and trading used to look down on banking, but banking looked down on sales and trading. It's like they're both looking down on each other. It's just funny. It's crazy. It's very complex.
Yes. Another thing that Hari inadvertently does to himself, you mentioned how he came up with that unheard of comparable company to say, hey, listen, I actually think this is really
or a good target
because they're looking
they're
at.
pitching acquisition target ideas. So it's like
Oh,
the
okay,
conversation
got it.
is for targets. It's not so
Oh,
much for the
sorry.
comps.
I
I
thought he was
believe
trying
it's
to find
acquisition targets.
a better
Yeah.
comp that they should be using. But
No,
regardless,
yeah.
he pitches an idea. But because he didn't follow the very simple instructions of you're supposed to work on the pitch book, Gus is supposed to work on the model. The associate is like, don't care, shut up, and focus on formatting. And we all know how important formatting is in banking, but this actually speaks to something more, which is especially in banking, how sometimes style matters more than substance at the junior level, because what you're proving is not your ability to be a thought leader, but rather to follow within the existing framework and not fuck things up for the people who are the thought leaders in positions. Once you have proven that ability to follow simple instructions, again, it's very much like a military structure, right? You don't want the newly minted recruit to be suggesting to the general, hey, here's how we should sneak up on this other army. You want them to be doing the basic things and not screwing them up to prove that you can trust them in a crisis, in a serious situation where there's actual risk. And so even if Hari had the best idea, it was going to be ignored and he was going to be told to focus on formatting and font, because that's actually what his job is. And you might think that's tragic or whatever, but the flip side of that is you see Harper all the time wanting to talk about her trade ideas. And Harper, and we're going to get to this in a second, but like Harper doesn't have the warmest and fuzziest attitude, right? She is very much like, let me talk about my ideas. Let me talk about ideas. Let's focus on the ideas. And in sales and trading, where there's a more direct correlation between those ideas and P&L, that is more rewarded, but you also can't ignore the style as well. You can't just say, I don't want to talk to clients, because at the senior level, everything is about talking to clients. So how far are you going to get if you're just like, oh, it's only about my ideas?
Well, it's actually really interesting because she's in the bathroom that one time, and again, a different bathroom scene, where her line manager comes in, Daria. And Daria looks at her and is like, oh, I thought you actually were going to speak to me. And I actually think that it's a very interesting thing, because I could see myself getting that feedback, probably not for the reason as Harper, but like when I started, I'm a naturally shy person. I tend to not want to like say hi to people if I don't think, like, I don't want to bother people. So I actually could totally see, and I don't think that's her motivation, but I did find it interesting that the woman is like, you've been here for 3 weeks. You haven't said hi to me. I'm your line manager. And you haven't said boo. So I'll let you talk with that. But I thought that was a very interesting scene.
No, so I think that this is a complex female relationship that's really important to unpack. So I'm assuming she's like a VP, okay?
Yeah,
when you say line manager, that's not really like a term we use very often.
I know. I was like, I've never heard of this.
It's really just, again, Harper's got this MD, this guy, Eric. There's going to be some level of additional employees between the 3-week-old analyst and the managing director. There's probably going to be another associate, a VP, an ED, or some level of other seniority between them. And so this woman is saying, basically, you directly report to me before you report to the managing director. And so first of all, for 3 weeks to have gone by and for them not to have spoken, okay, that's bad, right?
Yeah,
like that's very bad that they haven't spoken. And it's totally like Hollywooded up, but like this is a problematic dynamic. Daria is taking a totally passive aggressive tone with Harper, and Harper is being pretty passive aggressive too, if you ask me.
Yeah.
She is making no attempt to try to win this manager over. And she's just like, oh, well, this is just beneath me. I can't be on the phone talking about whatever. It's like, well, you're in sales, right? So I get it. There are other roles where you don't have to be talking on the phone about whatever and making people like you. Those roles are not sales, and those roles are not senior client relationship management. But so this woman actually gives Harper her first big break. She suggests that she comes to a client dinner. And let me say, when you first start out as an analyst, you aren't put in front of clients, just like you aren't allowed to execute trades. You aren't put in front of clients until you've demonstrated that you're not going to totally say something inappropriate or make a fool out of someone. It might be 3 weeks. It might be 3 months. There's really a learning curve for everyone. So for Harper to be getting a shot at a client dinner after 3 weeks, I remember my first client dinner. And granted, I was in a quasi investment banking role my first year. I went to my first client dinner on my birthday in November. So I started in September, and I wasn't allowed to go to a client dinner for 2.5 months. Now, again, I was on a desk that didn't entertain clients very often. So it was probably like the third client dinner since I'd been there, versus in sales and trading, it would have happened a lot faster. And she tells her this is giving her a chance to increase her visibility. It's actually an awesome opportunity. So Harper is 100% right. She leaps at the chance. And she's like, oh, I'm going to go look into the client's mandate. I'm going to figure out what her hedge fund does. I'm going to figure out what their trading style is, which is great. She's doing her homework. Daria tells her, well, don't take it too seriously. Okay, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that she's trying to set Harper up to fall flat on her face? Does that mean don't stress? Because I could totally see myself saying, like, don't take it too seriously. Like, don't overburden yourself by prepping too much. Just come and have a good time. And like, you don't have to lead this. I'm going to lead this dinner. I want you to observe and learn. Yeah. But I don't think that's what her intent is, because they paint this woman as very passive aggressive. So they show Harper researching this female portfolio manager or fund manager or whatever she is. She pulls up a YouTube clip of this woman talking about senior women in the industry holding junior women back who are coming up the pipeline. And the exact quote that they play from this video is, women of power seem to like to withhold sunlight from women coming up. So clearly they're leaning into this theme, right, of what is this slightly senior woman doing to this newly minted analyst? And I think they imply with this scene, just ever so slightly, that Harper's excited to see how she can flex her muscle in front of a woman who is spouting rhetoric like this, who is saying, like, I really want to expose junior women to opportunities. Harper's probably getting like super psyched for this dinner. But before we get to the dinner, there's a great scene with the research guys.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Our podcast is slightly guilty of this. I think we've had like one fixed income research strategy person on here, maybe two, versus the preponderance of like portfolio managers and traders and salespeople and things like that. Oh, maybe we have any salespeople on, but you guys have to hear from me enough.
We have you, but I don't think we had a single salesperson except for you, Jen.
Okay, so research is in a meeting with sales. And this happens all the time, where there will be like a morning meeting or like a regularly scheduled meeting where research will talk about what they're publishing. And that research is supposed to be, that used to be sold to clients. It's sometimes positioned in like a quid pro quo, like we provide this information for free. You guys do trades with us. We make money off the trades. It all comes out in the wash. There's various regulations around this, which I really don't want to get into. But they've got the research guy and he's like, we've done an analysis of the trajectory of the market dating back to the 2007 housing market. And Clement, who is this old school sales guy, is like, dude, shut up. Any new trade ideas? And he's like, what's your current thinking? And he's like, well, there's no change to our actual call, because research will have an official call on something. And they say that their call is still overweight with a preference for the US. They don't say overweight what, whether it's equities or fixed income or whatever. And sales is like, why am I bothering with this meeting to hear about this article that you've published about 15-year-old, or I guess at that point it was 13-year-old housing data? Like, nobody cares. Give me something I can do something with. And they're like, once again, the research team excel in wasting salespeople's time. And so we've talked about how there is this perception of lesser than between both sales and trading and investment banking going back and forth. But within the hierarchy of sales and trading, the farther you are from P&L, from making direct money from the firm, the less well-regarded you are within that internal structure. So traders think of themselves as being the cream of the crop, and they look down on salespeople. Salespeople are like, well, we're closer to the traders and we're closer to the clients. We really look down on research, right? Researchers just sitting there by themselves, a bunch of nerds doing work, writing reports. And that's not accurate at all. All three of these roles contribute very much to the end goal of getting clients to trade with the firm and making money off that. But the reality is this is the hierarchy within it, is that sales and trading don't take research as seriously as research takes themselves.
Yeah, and I think banking might have the similar feeling. But again, it's like if you want to go win business in an IPO, who your research analyst really freaking matters. Like we talked about, that's going to be the reason that someone might choose XYZ Bank over someone else is literally for the research analyst, because that's who investors are looking to. They want to hear what the research analyst thinks. They don't care what the banker thinks. Like they want to hear, they hear what the research analyst thinks. So it's, again, that's what I'm saying. Like the dynamic is so wild. It's just, and how people perceive themselves and perceive others and look down on others or look up. It's just like.
Well, yeah. And in fixed income, the client always wants to get on the phone with the trader. They want to know what a risk taker is thinking. And we're always like, but how about research? They can get on the phone. They're free right now. Like trader doesn't want to be bothered. Okay. So cut back to IBD for a second. We've got Hari asleep at his desk after having pulled yet another all-nighter. That associate, who I assume she's the staffer, but I actually don't know. Okay. She tells him he needs to leave. And at first you're like, oh, like, is she looking out for his well-being? No, they are tracking the hours that people log. And she says, I know you have not left this building in over 48 hours. And again, that's consistent with those checks that were put in place. We talked about this on a prior podcast episode after the death of one Bank of America associate in 2014, prior to the 2 recent deaths. You know, we've heard reports, and we've talked about this at length, that employees are being coerced into lying about those hours, or are lying of their own volition because they're so hell-bent on job security and they think they need to do this. She literally says in a whisper, practically, optically, I need you to walk out of the office and tap your card out, do whatever, then come back. And then she straightens up and says more loudly, like, you're not in trouble. I appreciate how you're meeting the needs of the business. Just in case anyone's listening, because she doesn't want to be overheard telling him to try to game the system to come back in. So they imply that she knowingly encouraged him to be in violation of the hours, but wanted the optics to be straight.
Yeah. The way that this was depicted, it was not as overt as, and by the way, it could be at some banks. I don't know what's happened, but I know there's like some really bad cultures and some really bad teams out there. But it wasn't depicted as like coming from the top, you need to have, you know what I mean? But it was like still subtly,
it's junior on junior crime, effectively.
Yeah. So that was obviously not great. They said that they're going to have the client come in for a 9 a.m. meeting and they need to get the books, the decks, the pitch books to the printer. And this was a very real thing.
6.
And I thought it was fascinating because I'm like, it's 2020. Are people still, because again, back when like in my day, back in like, 2010, we absolutely sent everything to the printer and you had to know like, okay, we send this to like creative services. We need to send this to the printer at this time. You have to, they were doing like the actual like stuff. And then, but anyway.
That was the name of the internal division at Morgan Stanley.
Morgan Stanley, where you send it to get everything printed.
Creative services. God, haven't heard that word in 11 years.
I know, right? But so there was so much that was, again, totally spot on, where then the next morning he, like I said, he had fallen asleep at his desk after he finished everything. The next morning he gets the books. He's flipping through them, which is something that people would do, make sure there's no mistakes. And he finds one page he didn't have the Helvetica 12. And by the way, his
times
VP
13, they show him selecting it. I was like, no, shouting at the screen.
And so the associate comes in, she's flipping through it and she's like, this is fantastic. Like, Hari, you're in the meeting with me. Because she had said earlier, between Gus and Hari, one of you guys can come to the meeting. But he's there freaking out because there was one page where he had the wrong font. She didn't even bring it up. And
she didn't notice it.
She didn't notice it. And he's freaking out. He's calling the printer. He's like, please just reprint this one page. And by the way, we used to do this where like if there was a mistake, in the olden days, people would actually have to bind the books themselves. That was a whole other thing. And some of the banks that I taught at in the early like 2010s, 11s, like people were still doing that. Now I don't think anyone's like doing that themselves. But what you would do sometimes is you would like take that page out, like you would have the little binding, have to take out the page. You
unbind it, you take off the binding clip, you collate again, and you put
So he was freaking out, wanted them to do this. The guy was like, we can't do that for that time. He goes in the bathroom, freaking out on the phone, and then ultimately collapses. And then later somebody comes in and finds him. And that's how the whole thing happens, where he passes away. And
so before we get to Hari's death, which is right towards the end of the episode, let's get back to now this dinner. So we've got 2 separate perspectives on this, which I absolutely love. When Harper tells her MD that she's gotten the chance to go to this first dinner, he starts telling her about his first dinner. And this is just so accurate because everybody remembers their first dinner. I literally just told you, I remember the exact date of my first client dinner. Like, I know the restaurant, I know what I ordered, I know everything. And his story is so amazing also because I think Eric is probably actually only a year or 2 younger than me. Like, he's got gray hair and I'm like, oh yeah, he's old. But he's like, my first dinner was a hedge fund dinner at pre-08 Nobu. And I'm like doing the math. And I'm like, first of all, how many
You're like, I was there with you.
Nobu? Yeah, exactly. How many pre-08 Nobu dinners did I do, or Nobu equivalent? There was Megu. There were so many other things that were like all these over-the-top hedge fund client dinners that always involved sushi. He says in the story, I got sick and I threw up at the table. And the hedge fund portfolio manager said, that was the first interesting thing to come out of my mouth all night. That literally sounds like it was plucked from the lips of one of the senior sales guys I worked with. Like, that sounds like such an accurate representation of exactly how a hedge fund portfolio manager would have reacted. But he's also giving Harper good advice. And, because he gets into it, he's like, but then the guy called the next day and now he's my client and blah, blah, blah. And he's giving her great advice about how this dinner ultimately might shape a long-standing client relationship for her. He is so right. I had clients I met at dinners early in my analyst career who later became my clients, either when I switched firms or when I became more senior, some of whom I still have relationships with today, over a decade later. So he is, again, giving her very good advice. Like, the relationship part of this dinner matters almost more than what you say. You could throw up on the table, metaphorically speaking, please don't do that, right? And still end up with a solid relationship. So I really liked that he made that point.
Yeah.
Contrast that to, you've got now another one of the junior sales guys who works for that old school guy, Clement, and the research dude out for drinks. And the sales guy is giving the research guy shit about how he spoke to Clement, the senior old school sales guy, in that meeting earlier, where he was, talking back to him, even though he was in a research role, therefore deemed subservient by the old school sales guy. And the junior sales guy's like, look, that guy's got war stories. And the research guy's like, he's a fucking dinosaur. Okay, it took him 2 years to say good morning to me. So again, this is the same dude who totally ignored the analyst when he asked him if he needed coffee. Classic friction, not only between the research guy who thinks they're smarter than everyone and is actually looked down on, but also especially young research who thinks they are definitely smarter than the super old school sales guy who's all about relationships and has only one account, which he mentions as a derogatory thing. I cannot tell you how many old school dudes there were who just had one account, but that one account was like PIMCO, right? So they had like this huge behemoth of an account, and the way that they would treat their junior people was totally polarized. It was either they treated their junior people like their flesh and blood and would defend them and win, by the way, because they had enough weight to throw around politically to the death, or some didn't give two shits about them. And it would be that kind of thing where, like, I don't know your name until you've been working for me for 2 years and you've proved yourself. Both of those guys exist in equal measure, and hats off to the showrunners for doing their homework on setting up both of those dynamics. And so what the research guy does say to the junior sales guy, which is good advice, he says, you need to start originating business of your own. Meaning, you need to start putting up sales credits next to your name, because politically you might not survive on the whims of this old school sales guy who's got his one account. You want to bring in a bunch of your own accounts and have your own book of business. So if this guy retires or becomes politically unfavorable or doesn't give a shit about you, you have something next to your name, which is 100% true.
Yeah.
Okay. We're nearing the end, I promise. Now we're at the dinner. So it's Harper. We've got the senior female fund manager. They've got Daria, the mid-level female manager, VP, and some dude called Mikey across from her.
I don't know. I have no idea
who Mikey is.
I don't either. And I also have not seen him in other episodes.
But great. He's like Mikey a forgettable.
Was awesome. I don't know who the hell he is.
Forgettable Mikey. So the female client is telling some random story, and Daria and Mikey are like, and Harper's not even breaking a smile. So the client kind of starts poking at her and goes, oh, does she have an on button? Basically giving her the same kind of ribbing that Daria was giving her about, like, I never thought you were going to talk to me. Like, why are you so quiet? Why don't you have a personality? I get they're trying to show the contrast between the salespeople who are falling all over the client about something that's unrelated to work, and Harper, who's like, I am so excited to present my trade idea. But, like, I actually think that there is more to it than that, in the sense that we hear all the time the chief complaint being that new hires have an inability to communicate this day and age. And it's like little things like being friendly to a client. Okay, you don't have to overly laugh at all of her jokes, but you can crack a smile and make her feel comfortable. As a salesperson, like, this is part of your job, is building a relationship with the client. And think about it this way. If you came to this dinner hell-bent on presenting a trade idea, from whom would you rather hear a trade idea? Someone who has not said 2 words to you and glared down at their food the entire dinner, or someone who's made an attempt to get to know you as a person and acted in a friendly way?
Well, I will say, I mean, Daria does later give Harper the good advice, which is, when you get on the phone with a client, you need to talk about them. You need to, like, have a conversation.
Oh, I didn't know that this happens later. That was in episode 1. That's great.
Oh, that was...
No, that's not episode 1. That's awesome.
Oh, no. All right.
No,
well,
that's great.
The point is, she says to her,
because she's right.
Because so she says, flip this over. She's like, you want to talk to them and make them think you're their friend, so they forget what you really are. And Harper says, which is what? And she says, a counterparty. And I thought that was, like, such an interesting line.
100%, 100%. I love that. And I love that they bring that nuance into it rather than what they depict a little bit of in this dinner episode. If you had this as your only data point, you'd be like, Daria is being portrayed as this sycophantic salesperson who thinks sales is just about laughing at people's jokes. And Harper's the real brains behind the operation, coming with a trade idea. You can be both, okay? You don't have to be a sycophant, and you also don't have to be boring and quiet and only there to talk business. It's both. And that's why you have these conversations at a dinner. So you can build that personal connection on top of talking business. That's the whole thing.
And again, I think that that's like part of the whole broader picture. And all these characters are complex. Like, I think Daria is also giving her good feedback and being like, look, you're smart and all that, but also you're a salesperson. And like, this is part of the job as a salesperson. It's not just come up with a great trade idea. I mean, if you want to be able to get someone receptive to that trade idea, you also have to have them actually like you and have a relationship with them.
They can go execute your trade idea with anyone else. Why are they going to come to you? It's not just because your desk has the best price. So 100%. So as the dinner's wrapping up, Harper finally starts pitching her trade idea, which is the following. Buy an option on the US 10-year at 4%. Now, she doesn't say which option, but I will tell you this. Again, this aired in 2020. We are in the midst of a zero interest rate policy in the US. This is a deep out of the money put option, meaning the right to sell 10-year US notes, something on the order of magnitude of like 150 basis points or 200 basis points above where they were trading at the time. It may be easier for you to think about it actually as a pay or swaption and just think about it in this very simple terminology. It's the right to pay 4%. You make money if you're paying 4% and rates are at 5%. You lose money if you're paying 4% and you could be paying 3% if rates are at 3%.
I'm curious, and I don't know if you know the answer to this. In a typical option like this, what are the terms? Is it 1 year? Is it less than 1 year? Is it 5 years? Like,
it could be anything. And that's why, especially so if it's a board option, there are going to be specified expiries. So if it's like something that's traded on an exchange, which it would be for a US 10-year note most likely. However, because they end up doing this trade voice over the counter, it's actually a derivative is most likely what they're doing. And it's likely a pay or swaption. And you can set whatever dates and terms you want. So this could have a 1-day expiry. This could have a 10-year expiry.
Because that's what I was trying to think. I'm like, did she make money on this trade? Because we all know what actually did happen to rates. They went up. They went up to like, the US 10-year was up to like 5% in 2024. So I'm like, did she make money? Was Harper like actually secretly a genius that this was in 2020? And anyway. So.
Well, yeah, no, you're 100% right. So initially the hedge fund manager dismisses this. And she's right to dismiss it, by the way, because for years, every single old school salesperson, not young salesperson, was like, oh, let's buy high strike payers. So this is like a little bit of an inside joke within the industry because every single brilliant genius sales idea between the time when rates hit 0 and for the next 10 years before they rose again was basically, why don't you spend some premium to play for this tail risk that rates rise? Because it's really cheap to buy these options on rates rising because the market is not anticipating them to anytime soon. Actually, it's funny because when she's talking about it, Mikey across the way goes, bears always lose money in this market. He actually got the joke that like, this is kind of a stupid trade to pitch because the market's not pricing this in. You can buy this option really cheap, but your premium is going to expire worthless. Now, Harper was right, but the thesis behind the trade was wrong. And it's one that's commonly held by people. And it's that basically at the time, her view was the US president is trashing the reputation of the US overseas. People are going to lose confidence in the US's ability to repay its debt obligations. They're going to start to go down in value. China's going to liquidate its massive holdings of US treasuries and they're going to sell off. People have had that theory for years. It's never happened. Rates sold off for very different reasons, right? But this whole thing about China selling has never changed. No. The pandemic was what caused rates to rise.
The pandemic started the whole inflationary spiral. Like because of the pandemic, we spent a lot of money. That caused inflation. Yeah. It was a more complicated thing than just COVID. But like COVID kind of was the instigator that then led, the chain of dominoes to fall.
So she pitches this idea and you can tell that the hedge fund manager is actually kind of receptive to it. But then what happens is totally unrealistic. The senior people go, well, I'm tired. Time to leave the dinner. I'm going to leave the analyst alone with the hedge fund manager. This would never happen during the very first dinner with a senior person like that. It could happen if you are the young person on the desk and there's a young person from the client, and they're basically like encouraging you guys to bond, right? It's like if your parents were to like leave you alone in a room with like, you know, the son of their best friends, like, yeah, like why don't they bond? You know, like hopefully they'll like each other.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. They also tell Harper to grab the bill. Davey gives her his credit card, but like in no way, shape, or form would an analyst be trusted up with wrapping up a dinner with someone of that seniority. There is potentially a more nefarious implication here that the more senior woman on the desk knew that this woman had a questionable reputation in her behavior and basically fed Harper to the wolves. I don't necessarily think that there's anything to substantiate that, but it's so unusual to leave the most junior person on the desk with the most senior person of the client at that late hour of the evening. It's very surprising. So it's the only thing that does leave the door ajar for that more nefarious interpretation. Because what happens is after the dinner, Harper and the client leave together in the same cab, and the client makes a move on Harper, which she rejects, but is very clearly made uncomfortable by. And she opens up to Hari, who's still alive at the time, who's like her roommate or whatever, or lives next door, and tells him that she's concerned about blowback from the firm if this gets back to them, which is like so tragic that she's feeling that way. Listen, I've had creepy stuff happen to me on client dinners before. All of this is realistic, and that concern that this is going to have negative implications for your career is very real. So I think all of this is very accurate. They didn't make it too overblown, but this is something that really does happen or did happen during my experience, you know, in the aughts and whatever you call the teens or tens or whatever.
And I did think it was an interesting choice that it was a female hedge fund manager that made a move on her.
Now, in the midst of all of this, they have to have an interlude because it's HBO where there's tons of copious drug use. There's a sales guy out at a club having sex with a woman in the bathroom. And I'm sorry, it's all like super HBO'd up and totally unrealistic. Like, I'm sorry, but no, they basically make sales in fixed income look like American Psycho. Like, I'm sorry.
And for the extra color around that too, someone had come to him and said, what time is the CPS morning meeting? And I don't know. He's like, I don't know. It's like whatever. And she says, it needs to be 7 tomorrow. And actually some guy says, if I was a dad, this would really mess up my morning, which I thought was
What did you think about that line?
I thought it was an interesting line, partially because it's like, I guess if you were a mom, I didn't have that initial reaction. I thought it was more of like a conversation about having a family, but there is absolutely truth to that. I mean, look, I'm thinking as like a parent. Actually, when I used to work for another firm, they made it like an 8 a.m. meeting. And I was like, I need to drop my kids off at school, like 9 a.m. Obviously, that's different on a trading floor because you're expected to be in early. But the point is that he knew that he had a 7 a.m. meeting and then decides to go out to a club. He was like trying to like ask a whole bunch of people, like, want to grab a bevy after work? And everyone's like, no. He ends up going out to a club by himself. Throughout the rest of this season, they sort of show that he potentially has some problems with drugs and alcohol. And as he's saying to this woman, I have to be up early, and then like does, I believe, coke. She says, well, if you don't go to bed, you don't have to be up early, just don't go to bed. That, I'm sorry, like, I don't know. It was, I mean,
there are going to be hard partying analysts. This was an extreme representation and normalizing it way beyond what I thought was realistic. But I did want to come back to that comment about parenthood, because the woman who said there should be a 7 a.m. meeting, and 7 a.m. meetings are very, very common in fixed income sales and trading, but it was a woman who said that, and it was an older woman. And I thought, maybe wrongly so, but that when he said, if I was a dad, that would be inconvenient, implying that she's a mom.
Oh, again, I see now.
Yeah.
That basically that's going to be not great for her husband?
Well, for her family, like, aren't you a shitty mom by demanding this 7 a.m. meeting, even though everyone's in at 7 a.m. anyways? Like, who fucking cares? So what does it matter if you're a dad or a mom? I don't know. It was just very weird that he said that in response. And I was trying to figure out what they meant by it. And I still don't know what they meant by it.
I don't either, because I will say a lot of nannies won't come before 8 a.m. or a lot of daycares don't open before a certain time. So I do think that there's actually like validity to that. But it also, again, like depending on the context.
You can't work in sales and trading.
Exactly. So that's why it's a different thing. My initial reaction, but I think like your take probably is more spot on, because like you know what the culture is and that's very normal to be in at that time. So like
you would be in well before 7 a.m. If I showed up at 7, which I did most of the time, I was late. So yeah.
Interesting.
Let's wrap this up. So we get there the next day, Hari dies, and we see the different reactions, which I thought is actually really interesting. So we see everyone reacting in IBD. First of all the lights are off on the floor. It looks like everything's shut down. You've said, I think, that they shut down the group ultimately.
They end up shutting down the group.
So the associate who had, been talking to him about his hours, she has tears in her eyes. Gus is clearly very affected. And, his salesman roommate is the guy who was out hard partying. And he's like, oh, you want to talk about it? And Gus is like, no, but he's clearly grieving. And the sales guy's like, okay, and gets back to testing like the girl he hooked up with the night before or whatever.
Well, and the thing is that Rob also, that sales guy, is the one that found him too.
Yeah, and just totally unaffected by it. And they show, they even cut to almost like a sight gag with closed captioning of Eric kind of off screen talking to a client. He's like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's my job. Have I ever steered you wrong before in a trade? And then there's a brief pause and you hear, obviously the client said something. He's like, oh yeah, very sad. Okay, talk to you tomorrow, right? He totally brushes it off. And Harper overhears this and is gutted that no one's reacting.
Well, they're told that Hari is dead. And they also say the way that we react is going to be very critical, basically the containment of the story. But then Harper is also in the bathroom and overhears two women talking. It was the same one where they were saying shit about her and her being a non-target and a minority. But also they overhear this one, just clearly horrible person who says, this is why you shouldn't hire people who need the job. That he was trying so hard because it was important to him and he did want to do a good job, but he was too hungry. So to your point, there was just every reaction that people had was really awful.
They make most of the reactions from anyone who's entrenched within the firm pretty universally terrible.
Yeah.
Side note, there are many bathroom scenes in this show. This is the most unrealistic thing about the show. These bathrooms are immaculate. There was nothing more horrifying than the women's rooms, at least, at these investment banks. They were absolutely revolting. And true story, once the CFO of a $20 billion hedge fund came to a meeting at one of the firms I worked at, I will not be specific, and sat through the whole meeting. And at the end of the presentation by all the traders and salespeople and the research, sales coverage goes, so Richard, any questions? And he goes, yeah, I got one. Have you guys ever been in the bathrooms here? What is wrong with you people? You are animals. This is absolutely horrifying. And so they would have these signs up on the bathrooms at all the investment banks being like, clients use these bathrooms. Please not try to be terrifying people. And they were terrifying. And I don't know what's wrong with people, but it was awful and really scary. So anyways, it's just the most unrealistic thing. Their bathrooms were gorgeous on this show.
And especially the men's rooms. But I mean, I don't know. I've been in a lot of bathrooms at a lot of different banks. I don't know. Granted, they're not the trading floors. They're the higher ups.
Why would the trading floors be so much worse than the investment?
Because there's more people. I think because there's just the magnitude of people that use it.
Maybe.
Whereas on the higher up floors, there's just few. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of. But I don't know. Most of the bathrooms that I've been in have not been that bad. But
every single bathroom that I ever visited at an investment bank was terrifying, including the ones I interviewed at. So this was without fail. So Eric is recapping with Harper after the big dinner where she clearly has mixed feelings and she decides to email the client a follow-up about the trade and lets Daria know that. Well, Eric says, we don't hide behind emails here. You got to get on the phone. You got to call her. He doesn't know that this client made a move on her in the car. Eric seems like a really good guy, but I completely understand Harper not coming to him and telling him this. And this is it's funny. We had a conversation about It Ends With Us, and I don't want to get into the subject of domestic violence here and why people do or do not choose to leave. But having been in a situation where clients have made moves on me in the past and I did not tell my manager, or where managers made moves on the past and I didn't say anything, I can understand the very complex emotions around this. And it's not, if you see something, say something. You should report everything.
It's not an after-school special. It's
not. It's not an after-school special. That's a great way of saying it. It really isn't cut and dry. And I can completely understand why Harper felt uncomfortable, felt really I just don't ever want to talk to this client again. I want out of it. I don't know what to do. And Harper is galvanized by both overhearing that awful conversation about her and about hearing kind of the glib attitude about Hari. That after Eric tells her, he's like, you got to ask for the order. And that's exactly something a salesperson would say, ask for the order. And what that means is you need to ask them to come do their business with us. Whatever trade they're going to do, give us that business. We have brought you this idea. We took you out and built the relationship. Now it's time for you to pay us back in the form of the bid offer that we will capture on this trade. And so he tells her to ask for the order. So she calls up Nicole and she says like, hey, Nicole, I really want to follow up on that trade idea. And Nicole's like, all right, let's do it. And so she asked for half a yard.
I was like so excited for you, Jen.
Terminology. I know this was at this point. I'm literally shaking.
Mill and
so
bills.
Excited.
No bills.
There's
bills,
no succession botched lingo. Okay, half a yard is 500 million. Okay, and now we're talking dollars. We're not talking euros. So it's $500 million worth of a deep out of the money put, or again, since they're doing it as a voice trade, I assume, though I may be wrong, that it was a high strike payer swaption on 10-year rates. At no point do they discuss the expiry or the precise terms. We know that she said 4% at that dinner. Theoretically, they've priced this trade off screen in their email communications. And for simplicity's sake, I'm okay with HBO glossing over all those details. Now, she goes to Rishi, the same guy who was trading Euro 1-year rates, okay? No, you do not have the same person trading front-end swaps, trading deep out of the money, trading options, period, full stop, or trading options on US dollar rates. That simply wouldn't happen. She would go to a different desk, but that's fine. Rishi is our stand-in for all traders. Again, I'm not even mad. Here's what I get a little wild about. Okay, so without even saying what the price is at this point, he says, I'll fill her in half the size, acting like he doesn't want to take the risk. First of all, this is a super vanilla trade. Okay, options on 10-year rates trade pretty frequently. And also there's a price for everything, right? If it doesn't suit, charge more, which he ultimately does. But I love how he is balking at 500 million 10-year rates. That is 400K in 01. If we go back to our very first trade, he couldn't be bothered to even look up from his desk for 500K in 01 of 1-year rate. So all of a sudden now it's like we're talking apples and oranges. The two things don't. So there's a ton of inconsistency here, and that drove me crazy. Again, I don't think anyone's going to catch that, but that's what we're here.
No.
So he says he'll do half the size. She says she wants the full size. And you see this back and forth of Harper communicating what the trader is saying to the client, but she's not just parroting what he's saying necessarily. She's kind of translating. And to our earlier conversation, Kristen, she probably is muting that phone periodically or not muting it, because you may strategically. She says this really cheesy line. I forget exactly what it was, but she's like, the client won't put up with that price and neither will I. And that's the kind of stupid shit that a salesperson might say with the phone unmuted. So it really sounds like you're arguing for the client, right?
Yeah.
And this gets at the point of the fact that salespeople really do have these conflicts of interest on every single trade, because it's your job to do what's best for your client and to advocate for them. But the desk has to make money. You get paid out of the desk P&L, not your clients. This isn't a commission-based business. And that is something that so many people do not understand. This is not a hard dollar fee-based business, like selling real estate or even those old penny stock salesmen like you see like Leonardo DiCaprio and Wolf of Wall Street. Okay, that's not this. The desk is going to give her a price where she can buy this option, where they think they can turn around and strategically hedge it however they decide to. They have full discretion on how much or how little they're going to hedge and with what products they are going to hedge that risk. And they are either going to make a ton of money on this trade, lose a ton of money on this trade, or nothing's going to happen. You only get paid as a firm if they make money on the trade, right? So you want them to make money on the trade. And that's always at the heart of these salespeople's jobs. People don't understand this. And I really, really love that they showed this. So he says 5 basis points for the full size. Now let's do a little math. 5 basis points up front is how much, Kristen, on 500 million?
I have no idea. I can't knock zeros off of things.
$250,000. So the total premium for this option size is $250,000 if he sells it to her at 5. He ends up selling it to her 4, which is $200,000. You're paying $250,000 or $200,000 where they ultimately get done for $500 million worth of options on 10s. Okay. So we said the DVO1 of this trade was $400,000. So literally, once you hit the strike of 4%, rates only have to move half a basis point beyond that for your option to be in the money. That's how cheap this option is in terms of premium. So it struck so deep out of the money, and it's such a tail option that like literally by the time you actually get to the strike, it only has to go like over that in order for you to break even on how much premium you spent and then start making money after that. So this is a really, really, really cheap option. If that's how much he's quoting her, is ultimately 4 basis points. So he says 5 basis points for the full size. All right, now we're talking. She counters at 4 for 250 and work the balance, but like I want the whole thing, right? Oh no, sorry. Maybe he says, I'll do half the size and work the balance. Meaning, I'll fill you on half of your size right now at 4, which is where she had countered. Give me an order for the balance, meaning giving me time to hedge some of my risk in the market and I can fill you, right? That's a better way for a trader to make money than taking it down at the wrong price.
Right.
Anyways, Harper does her whole I'm sticking up for my client, and you've got Eric, the MD, backing her up. He's like, you brought her the idea. You charge full freight for it. You get it done, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, all that ends up happening really is she jams her own trader, and Rishi's like, fine, because I'm excellent. I'll do it at 4, which means, by the way, he could have done it at 4 the whole time. He was just trying to charge as much as he wanted. There's no way he would just do it at 4 because of this pressure from this 3-week-old analyst. But so my favorite part is when finally he's like, fine, I'll do it at 4. Harper panics and she goes, what do I do? Do I just say done? And that to me is the best part of the whole show, because yes, you just say done. It really is this magic thing with these over-the-counter derivative trades where you utter this magic word done. And now this entire chain of events gets set into motion of confirming the trade, booking the trade, actual billions and billions of dollars changing hands, and massive risk, and people potentially losing their shirts, and P&L, and driving the market and everything. So that simple word done means so much to people in the business that I think they really understood that, to make that basically the last shot of the show. And Eric says to her, do not forget this feeling.
Yeah.
And he, really understands how important this is. I mean, literally my heart was racing. I absolutely loved it. It made me so happy.
Yes, Jen has been giddy about this. So, but I'm glad that we did it. I really do think it's kind of cool to talk about just what the whole world of sales and trading is because you're right. Nobody actually understands it. And so the fact that there is a successful HBO series that is dramatizing it in a way that is accurate. This is what makes me so happy, is that you have the different spectrums. You have the Suits where you're none of this makes any sense. Right. Literally every single thing that you are saying is so confusing to someone who understands the industry. And then you have the Succession level where you're pretty much everything is spot on with the exception of maybe a few things here and there. And this is more on that side of the spectrum because we, like I said, get so many people ask us about what do we think about the industry? And we've been getting to it and then finally decided to bite the bullet. And we are so excited that we did. So here's the thing. We are not entirely sure what the format's going to be. We are absolutely going to continue to do reviews of this. And because again, Jen and I need to watch it. And we're
every episode is not good. There's no way that every episode has this much stuff in it. No. If it does, he's still my heart, but there's no way it has this many talking points.
Yes. So we still have a lot that we need to do. We still need to do season 4 of Succession, which I promise is coming. It's like a mountain. I'm halfway through the 4th season, Jen. You need to at some point get on it, but let's maybe finish the industry first. I don't know. We're kind of all over the place. So we have to do that. This weekend, just so you know, this weekend is going to be an Excel deep dive. So we're going to do an overview of just Excel, some best practices, some cool shortcuts that we want to share with you. And then we'll have a conversation with the founder and CEO of McAbacus. And so definitely check that out if you are someone who's interested in kind of getting up the learning curve with financial modeling and building Excel models and all that kind of fun stuff. And then we will be launching our course. So if you haven't already done so, get on the wait list. It's going to be awesome. We're really excited. And we'll also be doing a free webinar. Stay tuned for that. Again, if you get on the wait list, you'll get information about the free webinar and you can get your spot first in line. So yeah, so lots of really exciting stuff coming over the next week. And Jen, is there anything else that I am missing?
No, but I'm just, to all of you out there who are watching the industry, I really hope you're enjoying it. And I'm so glad I get to talk about my old life in pop culture. And I hope that this makes a lot more people interested in that side of the business who just simply don't know about it and don't understand it. And I'm so happy that HBO took a big risk in talking about things that most people have never heard of in their entire lives, and just using that jargon and saying, go figure it out. We're going to take a risk. We think the content speaks for itself. And I think it does.
All right. So thank you guys for being here, and we will catch you on Saturday.